In the last video, we looked at how to create a breakpoint. However, when creating your sound, the breakpoint is only half the story. To create a more dynamic sound, you need to use the breakpoints as stepping stones to morph between, allowing you to create a story of different sounds that are strung together as a series. In Morphine, this is known as a spectrum. As you can see, I already have a sound set up in the breakpoint editor. To add another breakpoint, we have to change our focus to the spectrum editor. And all we have to do is to right or alt click in the blank area of this editor, and this will create a new node with the vertical axis determining the amplitude of that breakpoint and the horizontal axis acting as the time ruler. The new node can then be moved about these axes by click dragging the node itself. This breakpoint can then be adjusted in the same way as the original breakpoint. If we now play a note, then what you will hear is the first breakpoint morphing over time into the second breakpoint. The amount of time this takes is determined by how far along the timeline the second node is. You can then add even more breakpoints to build up your spectrum. The timeline along the bottom displays the time in seconds, or in beats if you have the tempo sync button armed. If you need to see the times beyond those that are on display, you can simply click to drag on the timeline and move left or right. The last node in your selection determines how the note is held at the end of the spectrum envelope, unless you set loop points. The loop start and end points can be set by dragging these markers here. When it comes to looping a section of the spectrum, there are 4 different loop settings that you can select from: off, forward, backward, and ping pong. With this set to off, the spectrum completely ignores the loop points altogether. And when you set it to forward, the envelope will play through until the end of the loop point, then will jump back to the loop start point and play the loop again and again until the note off message is received. A setting of backwards will mean that the first time it reaches the loop end point, it will play backwards to the loop start point, then jump back to the loop end point and continue to play backwards. Finally, ping pong will mean that the loop section will be played alternately backwards and forwards for as long as the key is pressed. Normally when you stop pressing the key on your keyboard, it will just continue from the point in the timeline that you're currently at through the various nodes to the end point. However, if you activate this button here, then it will jump to the breakpoint immediately after the final loop point. One of the uses for this is if you happen to have a particularly long loop section, for example in a soundscape. Then when you release the key, you might have to wait some time for the sound to end, so activating this button will prevent this from happening. You also have these 3 controls up here. These control the rate at which Morphine plays through the spectrum itself. The rate control can make Morphine play through the series of breakpoints faster by adjusting it to the right, or slower by adjusting it to the left. The next 2 controls determine the rate at which Morphine plays through the spectrum dependent on the velocity and the pitch of the key played. By turning the key track control left or right, you can control the rate at which Morphine plays through the spectrum by changing the pitch that you play on your keyboard, so that at lower pitches it plays faster, and at higher pitches it will play slower, or vice versa. Similarly, with the V-track control, the velocity of the note struct will determine the speed at which the spectrum is played. By now you should have grasped the enormity of the customization that is available to you. However, it doesn't stop there. This last section of the generator allows you to map different spectra across different regions of the keyboard. You could go ahead and make each key play a different sound in a similar manner to a sampler, minus any velocity layers. After all this, you can then go ahead and program another series of sounds in each of Morphine's 4 generators. For those that find that this would be quite a difficult way to create sounds in Morphine, you will be glad to hear that to create your own patches, you do not need to generate all your sounds from scratch. In the next section of video, we will look a little closer at the easier way of getting sounds from Morphine, resynthesis, as well as looking at the morph mix control.